Your generous support makes this ministry possible. Thank you.
Father, we are grateful for the minds you've given to us. We recognize that we are not simply mind, that reason is not all there is, but there is also the Spirit and the revelation that you have given to us, and that there is a mystery in a great aspect of coming to know who we are and to know things about this universe and ourselves. But you have bridged the gap between what we can know and what you want us to know by revealing yourself and revealing things about ourselves through your word. We thank you, Father, that you allow us to come to know truth. Help us, Father, to be able to hold it with certitude, with certainty, but also in humility, knowing that it is you who are the absolute basis for it all. Pray that you would direct our class today. Help us as we move toward the end of the semester. And may we come to have at least an understanding of the non-understanding that so many people approach life with, so that you could use us in effective ways to share the light, the gospel of the salvation in the Lord Jesus Christ, in whom we pray. Amen. All right, you have some handouts for postmodernism. You will notice that it's different than the rest of the notes. It's just a bunch of boxes and blanks. And as you have already read Sire, then you will know that that he approaches it differently. He has to. It's not the same kind of a category. It doesn't proceed along the same lines. And so he compares it with pre-modern and modern thought in terms of what the issues are and how it works. So we will kind of follow through that, and you'll fill in the blanks, and I will talk about them and get the gist of what is going on here. And there's a little exercise that we will do that will help us somewhat, hopefully, get an idea of what is going on with postmodernism. With postmodernism, the term comes from comparing the basic eras in which we have the thought of the West, the thought of Western world coming to us. The pre-modern would be the Western world before the 1600s, a world where man lived not alone, but with the sense of deity, with the sense of gods. Even if it was in a pagan society, it was not a society based on a naturalistic view of the world, but it was a world inhabited by both the material and the spiritual. And so that would be in the pre-modern world before the 1600s. Descartes in the late 1800s marks the shift to the modern, and the modern would be a dependence upon reason. Descartes wanted to know what he could know for sure, simply starting with himself, so he took the route of doubting everything. The one thing that he could not doubt was that he was doubting, that is, that he was thinking. And that's where the idea, I think, therefore I am, comes. So thinking precedes his existence, and that then gives rise to the dependence upon reason for coming to a knowledge of the truth. And Schaeffer has been tracing that through the film series. Remember drawing the circles in the sand? And at some point they stopped drawing the circles. That's postmodernism, where there is now no longer a search for the truth, but rather some other way of coming to understand how we live and how we function in the world. Nietzsche, the late 1800s to the present, would be is credited with the shift then to the postmodern mindset. Nietzsche being attributed with the idea of God being dead, though it did not percolate down through into modern mentality for quite some time. But it will be to this, what Schaeffer calls despair or non-reason. And so postmodernism is not a term that was being used when he was doing the film series in the 70s, though that certainly was around in literary circles and probably in architecture for sure. But those are the basic characteristics of these periods. And so we're looking at this present state. Though, as Sire points out, it's not really a worldview as much as sort of like nihilism, the denial of a worldview. Prime reality is still what comes first, and so we start there, but not with the same kind of propositional statements. For the pre-modern world, the prime reality is in the area of being, and that would be God. So while there would be those who would be practical atheists before the 1600s, 1700s, yet they did not deny the world as being inhabited by God, created by God, that was the fundamental reality. So that's where we are in terms of the pre-modern. With modern, the prime reality, what really comes first is knowing. Man. So man is that which establishes truth and so forth, and it's through reason. And so it's not being, but knowing that comes first. Descartes, I think, therefore I am. Thinking, knowing precedes amming, being. Okay, just different form of the word. So you get what's going on there. So that was the big shift, is that we don't have something outside and eternal from which to define who we are and what truth is. We don't start with the being, the absolute being, but we start with knowing what we know, and it's on the basis of that we can come to the truth. And hence, various circles that explain how we know truth and how we function in reality, as Schaeffer drew them in the sand and then crossed them out. With postmodern, there is a significant shift, and it's a shift away from knowing to meaning. And it is language that becomes the prime reality, the ground upon which everything is established. Now you think, well, that's an interesting shift. How does that work? You've read Sire, whether or not you've gotten Sire. It's really not as difficult as some of the other chapters, I don't think, in putting it together. But this is the shift. We've made a significant movement from knowing to meaning. And with it, the loss of objectivity and extreme subjectivity with regard to who's doing the language, who's doing the meaning part of it. And so it has moved away from the confidence in human reason to arrive at the truth, to, as Schaeffer says, despair overcoming to the truth, the leap into non-reason, and the replacing of reason with whatever you want. And postmodernism is going to focus that in language. And Schaeffer actually, again, without really thinking in these categories, because they weren't really developed in writing and so forth yet, anticipates that when he talks. Remember, he's drawing on the hood of the old car, and he says these words. He has God there. It has no more meaning. It can mean whatever you want it to mean, and it can be used to manipulate. And that's exactly what postmodernism ends up doing, as we will see. So with prime reality, that's the shift to this modern idea of how to interact with the world. The second category is truth. Okay, then what about truth? What is the idea of truth? Of course, with the pre-modern, truth derives from a God-revealed, determinate meta-narrative. Now, you all understand that, so let's go on. I'll stop. Okay. God revealed. Okay. God is there. He's the only one who knows how everything fits together. He's the only one who has absolute and exhaustive knowledge of all things. And so it's only as He reveals that we can come to an understanding of truth, at least to the extent that we're capable of knowing it. So it's God revealed. It's determinate, that is, it's definite, it's one revelation, it's consistent, as opposed to indeterminate, which just, it changes and you never know what you've got a hold of. So it's determinate. It never changes. And it's a meta-narrative. Meta-narrative is the big story, okay? It's the big story that encompasses all other stories as the explanation of who we are, where we are, and so forth. From the standpoint of God's revelation, it would be the story of the Bible, the whole big picture. Creation by an infinite God who is eternal, who creates human beings. He creates human beings for a purpose. Something happens to untrack that purpose for at least a time, and then the flow toward the realization of that purpose. So it's the big story. It's the story that people carry around in their heads to explain things, to give sense to things, to organize the totality of the world in which they live. Okay? Naturalism is a meta-narrative. The meta-narrative of naturalism is that matter has existed forever. Everything is a matter of the evolution of various forms of this material universe, and everything can be explained in terms of matter acting on itself. So, that's the big story from the naturalistic worldview. New Age has a big story. So that's what we mean by meta-narrative. All right? And so it's that kind of sense of the whole that people carry around in their heads that can be spun as some sort of a scenario incorporating the whole. The play. What's the play all about? The play being none less than the totality of the universe in all time and whatever. So for the pre-modern, it derives from God. Obviously, for modern man, it's human reason. Truth comes from human reason that has access to the truth of correspondence. So we can look at the material universe, look at how it works, examine the cause and effect, relationships in all these different areas. We can look at human beings, we can see how human beings function, and on the basis of our minds, computing all of that, putting that all into some sort of a framework, human beings, the human reason, unaided by anything outside, can come to an understanding of how things really are, how things really work. So naturalism was based upon the confidence that human beings could come to a grasp of truth, if not in its totality, at least in its substantive totality, so that we can know where we are, know how life works, and we can maximize whatever life can become. So human reason. And remember, Schaeffer has emphasized this, and the Renaissance was the big turning point, where man began to believe that truth could become from reason alone, not God. He talks about Aquinas, how that all started and so forth. But human reason. So not God revealed, but human reason with access to the truth of correspondence. That is, that we can compare things and reason what is and isn't on the basis of how we understand the interaction of everything. Now, postmodern takes a significant change, and it is truly significant, with regard to truth. And that is that man doesn't discover truth, nor is man revealed the truth by God, but man actually creates the truth, and he does it as construct languages that serve our purposes. Now again, big sentence, that we create truth, and that everyone creates the truth for themselves. Now, you have been raised in the philosophical culture of postmodernism. You didn't know what it was called, but you've been told this in school, you see this on television, you see this in movies, you see it in advertising. You decide what's true for you. You've been told that in any way? Yeah, you have. All right? That's postmodernism. All right? So human beings create truth, but they create truth as construct languages. That is, as languages that actually do things, as languages that not are just descriptive or communicative, but in themselves actually create the truth which they are describing. And these languages serve our purposes. So truth really is developed as I describe my world, and it's developed from the standpoint of what I want and what I need and what works for me. And so as from that basis I start to talk about how I conceive the world, then that is what becomes truth. And that is what guides me. Now, it's not a group activity. We're not deciding together what is truth. That would be naturalism. We're not allowing God to tell us what is truth. That would be theism or pre-modern. We are in ourselves creating truth by describing and talking about what we see and how we put it together. Now, I've got a little demonstration as to how this works. Sometimes we'll divide the class up and do little groups, but we don't really have the time this semester. EBC. What do those letters mean to you? What do they stand for? Huh? Emmaus Bible College would be a first thing that would pop into our minds around here. Okay, Emmaus Bible College. How would you describe Emmaus Bible College? What is it? It's a college, which is what? It's an institution of higher education, which teaches all kinds of different things at a certain level. That's recognized, by other institutions. All right. What else is there about a college? Learning. It's a community. It's a Bible college, so that informs, what the core is, and that informs much of what will happen here. Emmaus is just sort of a handle. All right. It's what distinguishes us from other Bible colleges and other colleges. All right. Well, not everybody who comes here fully buys into all that Emmaus Bible College entails. For instance, some people, when they come here, and this isn't as true as it used to be perhaps, might rather see in EBC something like Emmaus Bible Camp. Now, if you decided that to you EBC was Emmaus Bible Camp, how would you describe some of the various activities that go on around here according to that model? What would you suggest? Chapel. Okay, you've got chapel. Chapel at Bible Camp, we got chapels, and so, all summer I spent going to chapel, and I come here, I go to chapel, just like Bible Camp. How else? Huh? Oh, you got free time, and you've got regimented time. And you've got, dorm parents as counselors at camp, and you've got people who kind of oversee how you live in the dorm. Well, that's very Bible campish to some people. How else is what goes on around here like Bible camp? Recreation time. We have games and teams and points, and we eat together, and that's what you do at camp. And what else? Oh, we sing, we have music, all right? All right? A lot of shared activities. What else? Bonfires. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we have silly days. All right? And we've got activities planned for us, and so forth. And we, huh? We have a program staff. We've got speakers, who come and teach things. So really, we could do a good job of really spinning EBC as Emmaus Bible Camp. All right? And you know, at least in the past, it was more common than now, some people came and treated it like Emmaus Bible Camp. What do you suppose happened to them at the end of the first semester? They got a whole bunch of F's, and at the end of the first year, they probably went home with about the same accomplishment as they had from camp. Well, they would have got a lot more good teaching, but nothing to show for it from the standpoint of a college credit or a college transcript, all right? But if you wanted to make Emmaus into Emmaus Bible Camp, you could tell it like that, could you? In fact, we've just started the pretty good meta-narrative of that, the whole storyline of that, right? Now, could it work for you to come and treat this as Emmaus Bible Camp? Well, it could to a degree. It could as far as your day-to-day experience. And if that's all that's important to you, and you know, credits and transcripts and so forth, or degree really isn't your thing, you could come and live here as Emmaus Bible Camp, could you not? And make it work to some degree. Now, that's what postmodernism does with the world. You conceive of, you know, what we're in, however you want, and in your spinning it, in your describing it that way, you are creating your own reality, you're creating the world in which you live, and that for you is truth. Okay, now different people will spin different stories. Now you say, well, that just could be complete anarchy. Well, there's a section in Sire where he deals with this, and I probably need to put this in these notes. I think this is an edition of the fifth edition. He's added this. But the reason that you don't have total anarchy is that there are enough people who share those basic worldviews that they can live together and get along. And to the degree that it works for you, you're happy to live there, and if you can isolate and insulate yourself from things that don't fit, just ignore them. And so we can kind of create our own world, can't we? Within the real world, ignoring the parts that just don't fit. And we do it through the creative description, the creative telling of the story of Emmaus Bible Camp or Emmaus Bible College or Emmaus Bridal College. We could describe this from the standpoint of, well, this is a place where I go to find a husband or a wife. And all these different activities are designed to help us, process that, to meet people in a wholesome atmosphere, to meet Christians, to be mates, and we have policies that have to do with relationships. And so, what better place to find a mate? So, you could come, and this could be what Emmaus is for you. And the way you describe it, the language that you use, creates that as the world of EBC. You see how that works? Well, that's postmodernism. And postmodernism says there is no objective truth that everyone is to discover and buy into. There is the truth that each person constructs for themselves through the language as they use it to describe how they conceive things are. Okay? So you can see the part that language plays. Good. So that's where truth derives from. Man creates truth as construct languages that serve our purposes. Now, the role of language then, to pursue this a little bit more. From the pre-modern standpoint, where there's a God who is revealing, God reveals and records an authoritative meta-narrative. So the Bible is not just a collection of the writings of men, though it is the writing of men. It is also, in God's partnership, His communication to us. Communication through men, communication through language, communication that takes, translation and interpretation. But it is a revelation. It is God telling us the big story. in some pretty interesting detail in a lot of parts. And it's authoritative, and it is to be believed, and it is to, it fits the world, he says. And so that's the pre-modern understanding of what language. Language is communication. It's the communication of truth, the communication of factuality, which can be shared, and therefore a common view of the way things are can be held. For modern, human reason produces a meta-narrative yielding truth about reality. So the end product is the same. The end goal is the same in modernism. We want to come to an understanding of the facticity of the universe, of how things really are and how things really work. Starting from the standpoint of matter is all that there is no God, the confidence that human reason collectively can yield the meta-narrative that accurately describes the world, the universe in which I live. So scientific naturalism would be the meta-narrative. Evolution would be a big part of that. Beginnings would be a part of that. Okay? So it has the same goal as the pre-modern, and that is that we come to an understanding of the truth, the reality of the world in which we live. Just a different starting point. Pre-modern, it's God who reveals it. Modern, it's human beings who discover it by applying reason to the physical universe. Postmodern has a very different view of language. For the postmodern mind, all meta-narratives are only oppressive power plays without claim to truth. All meta-narratives are only oppressive power plays without claim to truth. So everyone is free to, spin a meta-narrative. But that meta-narrative, once it is foisted upon someone else, once it is put forth as this is the best meta-narrative, this is the one you should accept, then it is simply a means of bringing others under my power, into my control. Okay? Now, there's going to be an inherent problem with this, but we'll come back to that. So you see, language is not something that is used to either receive the truth about where we are or to come up with and then describe the truth about where we are. For the postmodern, language as a very personal thing, once it becomes public, really only serves to bring people into my way of thinking, and therefore to bring people under my power, under my control. We will come back to that and think about what the problem with that is. So you can see here that there is no quest for a common understanding, but simply the necessity of the absolute freedom of the individual to create reality and to choose what to believe, but not with the intent of, or should not be accompanied by the intent of convincing others of the superiority of my meta-narrative, of my, story of the whole, which is much different than humanism. And remember Schaeffer drawing circles in the sand. This is the way the universe is. And somebody came along and said, no, that's not it is. This is the way it is. No. And this is the way it is. No. But they were discussing, they were debating on the basis of human reason. What is this all about? And then at some point, he said they stopped drawing circles and they jumped to non-reason and said, we're never going to arrive at truth. Just, come up, put something else into place. Well, it's the language of meta-narrative. But it must not be put there as the meta-narrative to be accepted, because that's an oppressive power play. Okay, that would be very much part of postmodern thinking. Now, that brings us to human identity. So where does this leave the human being? The human being derives in terms of who we are from our starting point. So we got three different starting points. Here we go. Pre-modern, that is Christian theism as we're conceiving of it and have talked about it. Man is dignified by virtue of being created in God's image. So man has dignity, has value, has purpose, has meaning, because we have been created by a God who has created us to be a certain thing and a God who has created us for a certain purpose. And so it is derived. Our dignity is derived. And we had a little demonstration of that when we talked about Christian theism. That the value of something, the design of something, the origin of something is what gives it value. And though God is all of those in terms of who we are as individual human beings. And so we have a rock-solid basis for a sense of worth and a sense of value and a sense of dignity. For modern man, humans are the product of chance evolution and natural selection. So that's the fundamental truth from the standpoint of naturalism for modern man. That we are here as the product of evolution. There is nothing guiding that, so it is not a purposeful. And yeah, we're pretty wonderful, but there's a lot of things in the universe that are wonderful that have evolved. Now, this is the naturalistic mindset. And so this is what has to be subscribed to under this modern view, that there is no God, but everything is a matter of matter. Now, of course, humanism doesn't allow this to go to nihilism and the death and the absurdity of all things. But remember, we commented they don't have an adequate basis for that jump. But this is the problem. This is the problem that all worldviews after modernism are all variations of modern worldview are trying to deal with. Now, postmodernism, again, going back to language, says this, that human is the insubstantial self. The insubstantial self. You are self. But there's nothing substantial about that until you construct yourself. And you construct yourself by the language that you use to describe yourself. So the insubstantial self is constructed by language used to describe itself. So you sort of start out as it's just a blank slate. You aren't anything until you come to a sufficient consciousness that you can create yourself by describing who you are. So that self-image is actually what you've created. All right? It's your imaging of self. Now we're going to come back to this, but let me just stop here. This is this is important in the terms of the human mind, even as God has created us, in regard to how we think about ourselves. As you grow, and right now you're in a very interesting, well, most of you, all of you except Terry and myself, are in an interesting age level where you're aware of just the glories of who you are as a person. And while you feel awkward about certain things, you are in many ways also blind to a lot of who you are as a person. And one of the painful things of growing up is that you become more realistically aware of what you're really like and who you really are. And those are often painful experiences. But the image that you carry around of yourself has everything to do with everything in your life. How you respond to situations, how you respond to people, the decisions you make, the feelings you have, the situations you avoid, the situations you run to. It comes out of a sense of who we are. And so there is truth to the fact that we do, to some degree, have an involvement in the image of ourselves that is created and that we operate on the basis of. Now, what postmodernism says is that's all there is to the picture. That's all there is to the self, is what you have determined it to be. There is no reality in terms of being made in the image of God. There's no reality in terms of being, one with the universe in a New Age concept. There's no reality to anything other than what you spin through the use of language in describing who you are. Now, the human being does have a tremendous power to do things with thought and word. And how we conceive of ourselves has everything to do with how we live. And so postmodernism takes that truth and runs to the end with it. Takes it to, makes that the all, makes that the everything. But in reality, we are created in God's image, and what He wants us to do is to come to think the thoughts that He's revealed to us about what that means. And to come to think His thoughts about who I really am. That's the proper way to construct a self-image. And it's only as I understand that, I understand my dignity, my value, my origin, I come to see my potential in Him, do I come to have a healthy self-image, and that I can be transformed in that thinking about myself. So even as Christians, we can operate on a false understanding or image of who we are. Or we can operate on the basis of our deficiencies and how other people evaluate us. And let that control the whole of how I see myself and therefore how I live. And so there is a power here. And postmodernism, camps on that. But that's not the everything. So, God tells us who we are, and He wants us to go to that as the starting point. And to begin to let that sink in and become the key thinking about, who am I as a person? One counselor who used to talk in this area and talk about self-image and so forth used the illustration. It's just an illustration. It's an illusion. It's not the interpretation of the passage. But when Jesus, into His ministry, asked His disciples, He says, "Who do men say that I am?" And they say, well, some say you're Jeremiah, John the Baptist, one of the prophets. And He says, well, who do you say that I am? And He says, well, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, blessed are you, because flesh and blood hasn't revealed this unto you, but my Father who is in heaven. So you see, they were faced with two different sources for identifying who Jesus Christ was. Man, and what people were saying, what God had said. And you know what? Every day you're faced with the same set of information in determining who you are. You're going to listen to what other people say about you, not just with their mouths, but with their actions. Value you, not value you, criticize you, reject you, oppress you. Or you're going to listen to what God says. And which voice becomes the most powerful is the voice that will most determine that crucial thing of self-image and how you live life. So there is a power in language in describing self, but it is not the reality of who we are. So we are a substantial self because we are made in God's image in terms of the Christian theism. But we receive that by revelation. For postmodern, you construct yourself through language. So you describe yourself as smart, as talented, as dumb, as pretty, as whatever. And that becomes you. So again, that's a significant departure. Now, ethics. We are left with ethics. Based on the character of an unchanging God, an unchanging, transcendent God who is good. This is ethics, pre-modern Christian theism. There is a right and a wrong. We may not always exactly know how to work it out, but it doesn't come from anywhere other than God. It's His character. So for pre-modern man, for man based in a universe where there's a God who is there, who is the good, then ethics, what I know to do, right or wrong, is based on the character of an unchanging, transcendent God who is good. So that's a rock-bottom, absolute foundation. For modern man, it's based on universal human reason and experience and the ability to discern right from wrong. So again, it's human reason applying to experience and just some intuitive way to know right from wrong. And so, again, there's a confidence that man, apart from God, can come to know what is right to do, what is wrong to do. It would be in looking at the universe, in correspondence, in experience, what works. But again, it's human reason that becomes the judgment. Now, we've already noted how that leaves the door open for all kinds of things. It changes, and there's no universal test. Now, for postmodern, morality is the multiplicity of languages used to describe right and wrong, as you would think. So the whole thing goes back to language, doesn't it? The whole thing goes back to language. And this is why the formative movement for postmodernism came out of literature and the deconstructing of literature, with the idea that, we can pick up Homer and read him, but there's no way we can really understand what Homer was saying. Everything is too far removed. All I can do is say what I take out of the story or the meaning that I construct from the words that Homer used. And so that's the best that we can do. And so it really came to fore and kind of paved the way for philosophical postmodernism and all the other through literature. Now, again, if you went to public school, you were exposed to this. And you say, well, teacher, I don't understand what this poem means. And your teacher said, what? Well, what's it mean to you? What do you see in it? What do you make out of it? Well, I see this and this. Well, then that's the meaning for you. And somebody on the other side, no, I see something completely different. And your teacher, influenced by postmodern mindset in regard to literature, well, then that's what it means to you. And those are equally valid. Huh?
Teachers never tell you you're wrong.
No, they can't tell you you're wrong. They can't even tell you that's the wrong interpretation of that guy. Everybody gets a trophy. That's another aspect of it. But you see how it's language. Well, what you describe whatever to be is, so everybody has their own way of describing what's right and wrong, and so morality is simply the multiplicity of languages. Now again, how in the world can that work? Well, it just so happens that there's enough commonality with enough people, usually in most places, where they're sharing enough common basic values, even though those values come from Christianity and they don't know it or admit it. Yet they'll say, well, it works better if it's wrong to murder. Okay? It works better if it's wrong to go into people's houses and take things. And so we agree on that. They just happen to share the same language of right and wrong. But you can see how it all has to do with languages. It all has to do with the power of the human mind, not to think things out, but in the describing, and the power of the describing, the power of the creating, the power of defining. That's what creates reality, truth, ethics, a sense of self, and everything. Let's take some questions. Bethany? Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's relativism. Everybody's responsible for their own everything. but it's conceived in terms of language. Language is how it works and how it's worked out and how it's communicated. Other questions? Observations?
How do you share the truth of the gospel with someone who doesn't believe the truth?
Well, that's a problem, and we'll get to that. And again, when in Francis Schaeffer's term, how do you share the gospel with somebody who doesn't believe in truth? Share the truth of the gospel. You have to take the roof off at some point. And we'll come to some of the critiques of postmodernism and so forth to that can be a door that can be, at some point they're going to have to come to a sense of despair over this really being a workable worldview in all the ways that we need it. But that is a challenge. That is the challenge. That is also why the whole idea of truth and Christianity is why Christianity is, the one group around. Christians are the one group that aren't tolerated by postmodern man. Because we are the ones who have the audacity to claim that there is truth and that we can know it. Okay? And they just say, well, that's just your power play. That's your meta-narrative to bring other people under your control. And, meta-narratives have been used like that in history. And they've been used by the church like that in history. So, they're not totally without reason for that accusation. But you can understand why Christians who, in one sense, we're the most tolerant of people around, but by the very fact that we have the concept of truth and absolute truth, that, that's the one thing that's not allowed in the postmodern mindset. No, you just have to let everybody be free to choose what is truth or to manufacture for themselves what is truth. John?
So are there no postmodern mathematicians?
There are, and we'll come to that because what they yeah. In fact, I'll read a section from Sire in just a moment that will answer that question. They do have to live in the real world, and so but that is one of the inconsistencies that we'll point out. Yeah. Let's look at the observations and the critique. First of all, valid observations. In other words, Sire talks about some of the true things that it says. For instance, postmodernism is a critique of optimistic naturalism. That is, that human reason can solve all. So they do point out, and here, they're saying after centuries of the quest of modern mind, of unaided reason to put it all together, we're no agreement. In fact, we're farther apart than we ever were. Therefore, human reason is not sufficient to nail everything down truth-wise, objective-wise. So that is a criticism that we would have too. So the critique of optimistic naturalism is on target because human reason is ultimately insufficient to arrive at truth and the totality that we want and that we need. Okay? The second that he mentions is that language is closely associated with power. It does things. And I've already illustrated that in terms of just, how I conceive of myself. Or, what language does to other people. The old nursery rhyme that your parents told you that was false. They're trying to make you feel better. Sticks and stones can break your bones, but words can never harm you. Au contraire. In fact, words can do far more damage to you than sticks and stones can. Words can be tremendously destructive or constructive. So there is a power in language, and postmodernism has picked up on that. So language is closely associated with power. It does things. And there is a power in language to bring people under control, to bring people into some sort of oppressive controls. And you look at the great dictators and orator dictators in the world who have done that with people and with nations, and plunged whole continents into wars as a result. So language does have a powerful, effective aspect to it. And thirdly, human beings do have a limited perspective as seen by the way in which social conditions influence our understanding. Sire says society does mold us in many ways. So, you're raised in a certain area of the country, in a certain home, with a certain background, certain socioeconomic condition. You come out of that molded to some degree by those things. You tend to have the same political beliefs that your parents do. To like the same cars. Some of you drive Fords because your dad told you Ford was the only thing to drive. You have no idea whether a Ford's better than a Chevy, even though the guy on the television is telling you that all the time. So we are molded by societal ideas, and so that is a truth. And so we do have limited perspective as a result of those kinds of situations of input. However, to say that that all we are is a product of the ideas that are around us in the social settings and cultures and contexts in which we're born and raised, to say that's all it is to go beyond revelation. It's also to go beyond common sense, because there are ways to demonstrate that is not all. But these are valid critiques that postmodernism has of modernism, all right? But there are things to be said in terms of invalid conclusions. The first is, and you've got 5 here, it's the bottom of that page, the rejection of all meta-narratives is itself a meta-narrative. You probably picked that up already. To say, here's the big story, there is no one big story, is itself the big story. So they are rejecting the concept of meta-narrative as the way things really are, but that itself is a meta-narrative. So, is that an oppressive power play on their part? To bring me into the deconstructionist cadre or whatever. So there's a logical fallacy there, and I think Katie was speaking to that. The idea that there are no meta-narratives is taken as a first principle, and there's no way to get around this except to ignore the self-contradiction and get on with the show, which is what postmodernism does. But it is right to ask, how can you so confidently state that this is the truth of the way things are, when that itself is a meta-narrative type statement? Secondly, the idea that we have no access to reality, that is, that there are no facts, no truths of the matter. In other words, they are skeptical to the fact that we can really come to any sense of concrete truth, is self-referentially incoherent. Go ahead, use that in the lunch line, I dare you. Is self-referentially incoherent. It tells us something that we can't know. Okay? I'll let you write that down. So the idea that we have no access to reality, no facts, no truths of the matter, that we can only tell stories about it, is self-referentially incoherent. Put crudely, this idea cannot account for itself, for it tells us something that on its own account we can't know. So I want you to know that you cannot know. Oh, wait a minute. You want me to know something, but there is nothing that is really knowable? So how can I know something? How can I know that there's nothing? You see the problem? It's incoherent, self-referentially incoherent. It does not make sense of itself when it says what it's saying.
Everything we read is a lie.
That's right.
And that is written on a piece of paper. Correct.
Okay. Thirdly, if all language is indeterminate, how can we understand the deconstruction of stone propositions which are in a written, spoken form? You see the same sort of a problem with the truth. Nothing that is written or spoken can be shared in terms of absolute meaning and truth. And I am telling you absolutely that that is the truth. See the problem? They're using language to tell us that language cannot tell us anything. Language can only express, the truth of the Creator, but everyone must deconstruct that language to read their own truth into it. Now that's got to be the most critical blow to the whole thing. They're using language to tell you that language cannot be used to tell you anything. It can only be used to construct myself, to describe my reality, to create my reality, and to exercise a power play over you. And so to that person, you would say, all right, what you don't want me to know then is that you're seeking power over me and telling me this. And when their head stops shaking, say, now tell me this again, what you can't tell me. So again, in playing the game that there is no truth by saying language, cannot share, there's no reality, and language is just what I'm using to construct everything, is, again, it's a big contradiction. And fifthly, the critique of autonomy and sufficiency of human reason is based on the autonomy and sufficiency of human reason. So they are on the basis of their looking at things, analyzing the way meta-narratives work, analyzing the way language often does things and how language often is oppressive. They are using the human mind to conclude that you cannot rely upon using the human mind to do anything. So they're critiquing the sufficiency of human reason of modern man. That is, truth can be discovered by reason apart from any revelation of God. But they're using reason to knock down reason. John?
So basically they're using something that they say is a fact, but they say it's not a fact. Assuming it's a fact to prove it's not a fact.
That's it. So basically what they're saying is the only things that you can know for sure are what I'm telling you, and the only way you can trust language is to read what I'm telling you, but after that, then the game is off. Well, the game's already off if what you're saying really is the way things are. So, they're saying this is the way things are, but they're saying you can't tell others the way things are. Everybody creates the way things are for themselves. Neat trick, huh? Okay, conclusions. Postmodernism represents the challenge of the death of God, the death of reason, the death of truth, and the death of self. It's sort of like a lot like nihilism, isn't it? The death of everything. So postmodernism presents the challenge of the death of God, the death of reason, the death of truth, the death of self. However, thinking people still wonder about what is really real and how we know. And isn't that what postmodernism is about? what is this idea of knowledge, and how do we know, and how do we know how to proceed? If we are only material beings, why do we think that we can know anything at all or we should be good? If we are only material beings, a product of unintentional, uncaring sources, why do we think that we can know anything at all? And why do we think that we should be good? Again, it goes back to the whole problem of naturalism. There is no basis in naturalism for ethics or for knowing. Now that's on page 242 if you write slow. Postmodernism is, in Sire's words, really just the most recent phase of modernism. Both rest on two key notions. One, the cosmos is all there is. There's no God of any kind. So that's naturalism, isn't it? The other key notion is the autonomy of human reason. So it really is just another phase of modernism, a phase which many think won't be around and have, tremendous influence because, again, it is so inconsistent and it's self-referentially incoherent. Now let me read this last statement. I'm going to put in the part that's not on here. Sire says on 243, Postmodernism pulls the smiling mask of arrogance from the face of naturalism. The face behind the mask displays an ever-shifting countenance. There's the anguish of Nietzsche railing against the herd mentality of the mass of humanity. The ecstatic joy of Nietzsche willing into being the overman. The leering visage of Foucault seeking the intensification of sexual experience. The comic grin of Derrida as he deconstructs all discourse, including his own, and the play of irony around the lips of Rorty as he plumps for a foundationless solidarity. But no face displays a confidence in truth, a trust in reality, or a credible hope for the future. So you can really see that this is what Schaeffer is talking about in non-reason. So you just put in the place of truth and reason and revelation anything that you want. And postmodernism has just put a literary face on it. You use language to construct your world by describing it. You use language to order your life. You find people who share your basic language construction, and that's where you will, find yourself able to get along in a group. And as long as everybody doesn't come up with their completely unique worldview, at least subgroups will be able to get along with each other. But again, it's not an answer. It's a non-answer. And I think pointing out some of these inconsistencies and just asking people, how can you assert that you can't assert anything? And I think I've got a better way. Let's look at the assertions of God who has demonstrated that He is there to assert, and see if that fits better with the real world that we're living in than the world that we construct through language.